After the Islamic Revolution in Iran, a lot of people tried to escape from Iran. Many Jews tried to cross the border from Iran to Pakistan, then walk for days all the way up to Turkey, and in Turkey take a plane to Israel, the United States, or any other country in Europe. In 1994 and 1997, 12 Iranian Jews that tried to cross the border from Iran to Afghanistan disappeared somewhere along the border. Nobody knew what's happened to them. Their families went to the Iranian government to seek for information, but the Iranian government refused to give them any information. The families went and held their own investigation. They went to every hospital in Iran. They visited every jail in Iran. They went to every police station in Iran, asking if anybody knows what's happened to their sons, to their fathers, to their husbands, but nobody gave them any information. In the end, the families gave up. They left Iran. Some of them moved to Israel. One family moved to LA. A neighbor of the family that moved to LA came to them and told them that while back in Iran, he was dealing with the major prison in Iran, it's called Evin prison in Tehran, trying to sell them a land. In the course of the business deal, he was invited to the jail to take a tour to learn what the needs of the prison are. He came to the jail, he took the tour, he was accompanied by one of the guards who took him along, and towards the end of the tour, they had to go downstairs 10 floors below ground. When they reached the 10th floor, the neighbor saw a very dark cell. He approached the gate, and he suddenly recognized the boy of his neighbors that disappeared some years before. The kid was very excited. He thought that somebody came to rescue him. He approached the gate, but the neighbor didn't say a word, took a step back. In the end of the tour, they went upstairs, 10 floors up, and the neighbor who couldn't hold himself very carefully asked the guard who were the prisoner that he saw in the dark cell. And the guard told him that they were Jewish prisoners who tried to escape from Iran. So now we know that these 12 Iranian Jews are sitting in a jail in Iran, probably have been tortured, and wanted to raise public awareness for the case. Our way to do it as a law center was to bring a lawsuit against Iranian official, but there was one condition, that we catch him in the United States and serve him with a lawsuit. So one day we hear that the former president of Iran, Mohammad Khatami, is coming to the United States to be a speaker in the UN. We have very good connections with the Persian community in LA, and they got a hold of his itinerary, which say that the next night he's going to be a speaker in a dinner that was held by CARE, Council of American Islamic Relations. We learned that for $400 you can buy a ticket for the dinner, and for additional $400 you can buy a photo opportunity with Khatami. We hired a process server from Virginia, an ex-policeman, and gave him the court papers plus $800. $400 for the dinner, $400 for the photo opportunity. He came to the dinner along with his wife. His turn to take the photo with Khatami arrived. He stood near Khatami, handed him the papers, told him that the families of 12 missing Iranian Jews are suing him in court. Khatami took the papers, and the photographer took the photo. And you can see the photo in the back page of this booklet. The professor and his wife did not stay for dinner. Khatami had 20 days to answer the lawsuit. He failed, and now we are waiting for the Virginia court to come down with a judgment. When the court will give a decision. We know that Khatami has assets in Germany and France, which we will try to go after them. But this wasn't the reason why we filed the lawsuit. We filed the lawsuit to warn Iranian officials that once they leave Tehran, there will be courts, there will be process servers, there will be private lawyers that will try to indict them for their crimes against humanity. Many ask me, what can you do with a judgment against Hamas? So here's the story. One day, the head of the Palestinian Authority in Gaza, the head of Hamas, is actually the prime minister of the Palestinian Authority in Gaza, named Ismail Haniyeh, goes to Iran and raises $40 million. He couldn't use the banking system, so he put them in suitcases in cash, 22 suitcases, loaded the suitcases on a truck, and drove all the way in Egypt, reached the border to Gaza, but stopped by the Israeli forces who controlled the Gaza border at the time, who told him that if he wants to cross the border to Israel into Gaza, he has to leave the money behind. Ismail Haniyeh worked very hard for the money. He said that he's the prime minister, he has diplomatic immunity, and so do the suitcases. Israel did not agree, and for many, many hours there was a crisis in the border. Ismail Haniyeh wants to go through, and Israel does not let him. In the end, the one that came to save Ismail Haniyeh was the Arab League. The Arab League is one of the most anti-Semitic organizations in the world. In 1945, the Arab League boycotted Jewish businesses and corporations. In 1945, before the Israeli state was created. Then in 1972, they imposed oil embargo against Israel. And during the Intifada, they ran 60 decisions condemning Israel in the United Nations. The Arab League came to Ismail Haniyeh and told him that they have a solution. They will open a bank account on their name in Cairo. He will deposit the money in the bank account, cross the border to Gaza, and they will find a way the next day, 2 days later, to transfer him the money. That's what happened. The Arab League opened a bank account, Ismail Haniyeh deposited the money in the bank account, crossed the border to Gaza, and we got a phone call. We were asked if there is any way we can put our hands on the Hamas money in the bank account. So we did. We went to Washington, where the Arab League has an office, and filed motion for a turnover proceeding. We say that the money in the bank account of the Arab League belongs to Hamas. We have a judgment against Hamas. Turn the money over to us. The Arab League hired a lawyer, came to court, filed a motion to dismiss, and said that the money does not belong to Hamas yet, that it still belongs to the countries who donated it, and their proof was that the money did not cross the border to Gaza. We had a former Mossad agent that came to court and testified how exactly the Arab League opened the bank account, how Ismail Haniyeh deposited the money in the bank account, and why the money belongs to Hamas. And we were able to win the motion to dismiss. We believe that the Arab League has to pay this money to the terror victims. If we win the case, that will be the first time that the Arab League is paying money to Jewish people. That will be the first time that the Arab League is paying for its anti-Semitic policy throughout the years. And if we're talking about anti-Semitic organizations, let me introduce you to the most anti-Semitic organizations in the world. It's a hotbed for training terrorism. It's based in Gaza. It's their goal is to destabilize the Middle East, to to endorse the Israeli-Arab conflict. It's not Islamic Jihad, it's not Hamas, it's not the PLO, it's UNRWA, United Nations Refugees Workers Committee. And that's a story. In May 15, 1948, when former Prime Minister of Israel, David Ben-Gurion, heroically announced that they are going to create an Israeli state, a Jewish state, after 2,000 years, the Arab nations decided they are going to war against a small Jewish community. The Jewish community was unarmed, was out of money, was sitting in very, very small borders. Yet, to defeat the 7 Arab nations. When they were managing the war, the Arab nations called the Arab population in cities like Tel Aviv, like Haifa, and asked them to leave their home temporarily to help them defeat the Jews. They told them that by being in these cities, they make it a little bit complex, a little bit hard for them to win the Jews. They promised them that after they leave their home and come, they will get a signal to come back, and they will settle the houses of the Jews themselves. So many hundreds of thousands of Arabs fled, went to Jordan, went to the West Bank, and settled in Gaza. The war was over. Surprisingly, the Jews won. And that brought the UN, the European, being outraged at Israel. How did the Jews win? And what they're going to do with all the people who fled their houses? The Arab states refused to accept them. Those countries who told these people to leave their houses said, we are not going to let you integrate in our communities. They built camps and they let them sit and live in their camps. And the reason was that they wanted to keep these people as a problem, as a pawn, as a chess, as something that they can use in the negotiation against Israel. So now we have hundreds of thousands of people living in Gaza, living in the West Bank. They have to be housed, they have to be fed. Somebody has to take care of them, and the Arab nations refused. So who comes to the plate? United Nations. But they didn't use the regular refugee organization, the refugee organization that settled all the refugees from World War II, from all the wars around it. No. They created a new brand agency called UNRWA. And UNRWA's role was to settle these people, to give them work, to feed them, and slowly, slowly solve the problem. But they didn't. Instead, they kept them in their camps. They counted them and their children, and their children, and the children of their children as refugees.